In this video, we are going to look at rounding decimals. So before we get started, let's talk over the place value chart because it's important that you know the names of the different spots in the place value chart. A lot of times the question will ask you to round to a specific part of the place value chart, such as round to the nearest 100, round to the nearest 10th. And so it's important you know what those are. So we have a decimal point in the center, then we have the ones or wholes is sometimes known here, tens, hundred, thousands, and then on the other side of the decimal point we have tenth, hundredth, thousandth. And so if it has a TH, it's referring to the decimal side of the number versus the whole number side. Okay? So the first thing we need to do is be able to place these numbers correct on the place value chart. So pause the video here, draw out a quick place value chart and place those numbers in the chart, and then start the video again when you're ready. Okay, so for the first one, we have 0.03, so the 3 would be in the hundredth spot. Next we have 19.43 or decimal 43, so we have the 1 in the tens spot and the 3 ending in the hundredth spot. And finally we have 154.092, the 2 ending up in the thousands spot. When we're rounding numbers, what we're really doing is saying which number it is closer to. So for example, if I'm rounding the number 6.25 or 6.25, and I want to round that maybe to the nearest whole number, I'm saying, well, is it closer or more accurate to say 6 or 7? And so it's important that we know where it lies on a number line. So let's look at placing these numbers on the number line, with each little line in here representing 0.25 or a quarter. So again, pause the video, place it on the number line, and then start the video when you're ready. So this first one, 6.25, is going to go one space past the 6. 8.25 is going to be one past the 8. 7.75 is going to be one before the 8, and 9.5 is going to be halfway between 9 and 10. So when we're looking at rounding, we're going to be placing down a number line in order to help us determine which number we are to round to. So let's get started with rounding to the nearest whole number, or the nearest 1. So for example, if we were asked to round 3.6 to the nearest whole number, first, we need to have an estimate of that number. So we know it's going to lie between a 3 and a 4 on the number line. So let's draw our number line between 3 and 4, and each point on that line is going to be 0.1. So that means right in the middle, halfway, is 3.5, which means 3.6 is right here. So if we're rounding 3.6 to the nearest whole number, would it be more accurate for us to say 3 or 4? Is it closer to 3 or 4? And in this case, it is closer to 4, so 3.6 to the nearest whole number is 4. So I want you to try. Here are 4 different questions. Pause the video and round them to the nearest whole number, and then start the video again when you're ready. Okay, so if we look at 6.3 to the nearest whole number, we're checking out this 3 to tell us where on the number line it is. Is it closer to 6 or is it closer to 7? And the 3 tells us it's going to be closer to 6. For 7.4, it's going to be closer to 7, so the 4 tells us it's closer to 7. In 1.8, this 8 tells us it's going to be closer to 2. And 8.9, it's going to be closer to 9. So let's look at rounding decimals. So let's say we want to go to one decimal place, or we might also say to the nearest 10th. So then we're going to look at this number on a number line. We know it's going to lie between 7.5 and 7.6 on the number line. So if I draw 7.5 to 7.6 with each line in between representing 0.01, then right in the middle is going to be 7.55. So 7.59 is going to be way up here. So we can see, is it going to be closer to 7.5 or 7.6? And we know it's closer to 7.6. So what we're really doing is looking at the number right beside the number we want to crop to. So if you think of this number, I'm cropping it or cutting it off at 1 decimal place. So I'm cutting the number right between the 5 and the 9. And I'm going to look right beside that cut at the 9, and that's the number that's going to tell me where on that number line it is. And so this 5 kind of helps us picture where it's going to be. And so if it's less than 5, a 1, 2, 3, or 4, then we know it's going to be closer to the 7.5 here. But if this number is 6, 7, 8, or 9, then we know it's going to be closer to the 7.6. Okay, so let's try another one. Round 7.583 to the nearest hundredth. Now, if we remember our place value chart, it has this TH, so we know it's on the decimal side, and it's the second one in. So we have tenth and then hundredth. So I'm going to cut the number right here between the 8 and the 3. So let's look at this number on a number line. It's going to be between 7.58 and 7.59. And right halfway is 7.585. So remember that 5 is right in the center. So my 7.583 is going to be right here. So we're trying to see which is it closer to, and it's closer to 7.58. So again, because I'm cutting the number right here, I look at this 3 to tell me how far along this number line is. And because it's a 3, I know it's going to be closer to this side of the number line. So your turn again. I want you to round these numbers to the place that it says. Pause the video and then start it again when you're ready. Okay, so for this first one, we're rounding it to 1 decimal place. So I'm cutting the number right here, and this 7 tells me it's going to go up. So it's closer to 8.8. Number 2, we're rounding to the nearest hundredth. So I'm cutting it right here between the 2 and the 3. So I'm going to look at the 3. I don't care about the 4. I'm only looking at the number right next to where I'm cutting it off. And this 3 tells me that it's closer to the 2. So 6.62. Number 3, we're rounding to the nearest tenth. So I'm cutting it between the 3 and the 6. So I look at the 6, and the 6 tells me I need to go up to 4.4. And last one, we're rounding to 1 decimal place or the nearest tenth. So I'm cutting between the 1 and the 4, and the 4 tells me that I stay at 8.1. So what happens then if we have a 5? So if you remember when I was talking about the number line, I said if it's a 1, 2, 3, or 4, it's going to be closer to the left-hand side. And if it's a 6, 7, 8, or 9, it means we're going to need to go up. But what about the 5s? So for example, if we look at rounding 4.5 to the nearest whole number, if we look at it on a number line, we know it's going to be between 4 and 5. But 4.5 is directly in the center. It's not closer to either side. Right? So when it is right in the middle, it is that 5. The rule is that we round up. So we say that it's closer to the 5. Okay, so if it's a 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9, we round up. So even though it's smack in the center, when it's in the middle, we're going to round up. Okay, so try these ones out. These ones have 5s in them. Be careful of where the 5 is and make sure you're only looking at the number that's to the right of where you're cutting the number off. So pause the video, try these ones out, and then start up the video again when you're ready. Okay, so for this first one, I am rounding to the nearest whole number. So I'm cutting the number off right here. So the 5s in this question don't really, aren't really following that rule because the only number I'm worried about is this 7. And the 7 tells me that I do need to round up to 6. This one I'm rounding to 1 decimal place. So even though it's a 5, remember we always look at the number to the right of where we're cutting it off. So I'm cutting between the 5 and the 4. So the 4 tells me that I stay at 2.5. For the next one, I'm rounding to 1 decimal place as well. So I'm cutting between the 9 and the 5. And in this case, that 5 is going to follow the rule we just talked about, and it's going to tell me to round up. Now, because I want it to one decimal place, I'm going to write it as 8.0 so that we know that 0 is significant and that we have rounded to one decimal place. And lastly, if I'm rounding to one decimal place here and I cut it right here between the 2 and the 5 tells me I must go up to 8.3. So I want you to take a second to reflect on how you've done and give yourself a thumbs down, a point, or a thumbs up, depending on how you feel you have done with rounding numbers. So either you're having trouble and you need some help, you need some more practice, or I can do this, I don't need help or more practice, I understand.